What if tiny, nearly invisible changes stacked day after day could transform your life more reliably than dramatic overhauls and bursts of motivation? This audiobook distills the science and practice of getting 1% better every single day into a clear, no-nonsense playbook. How to design micro-habits that survive boredom, how to measure progress without obsession, and how to turn marginal gains into unstoppable compounding. Listen closely. Each chapter hands you a specific habit, a simple ritual, and a 1-week experiment that proves the idea works. Do the work for 12 weeks and the person you are today will look small compared to who you become. Chapter 1. The Power of Tiny Gains. What if the single most reliable path to extraordinary change is not a dramatic overhaul, but a tiny daily advantage compounded over months and years? The idea of improving by 1% each day sounds almost trivial until you simulate the math and feel the weight of compounding in practice. 1% daily compounded becomes massive progress because improvements multiply, not add. The first practical lesson is to internalize how marginal gains operate psychologically as well as mathematically. Marginal gains reduce resistance. A 10-hour study block tomorrow feels impossible tonight. A 10-minute highly focused ritual is achievable tonight and creates a low-friction habit loop. Start by choosing a domain that matters enough for you to sustain interest, and choose a tiny behavior that nudges that domain forward. If your goal is better fitness, commit to a 2-minute mobility routine before breakfast. If your goal is writing, commit to 150 words every morning. The behavior should be so small that your internal resistance cannot invent a persuasive excuse to skip it. Once the tiny habit is consistent, increase it by a similarly small multiplier, 15% or a fixed small increment, and keep the pace manageable. The key mechanism is iterative overload rather than episodic intensity. Small repeated wins build identity. Humans are story-driven. The act of completing a tiny task daily produces evidence that you are someone who follows through. Over weeks, those identity traces accumulate and make larger behaviors psychologically easier. Another practical move is to treat the 1% improvement as an experiment with a clear short horizon, such as 14 or 28 days. Run the micro-experiment, collect objective signals, and decide whether to scale, pivot, or kill the habit. Experiments reduce perfectionism because they admit that no single trial will solve everything. You are running calibrated probes rather than undertaking a permanent commitment. Use simple metrics that matter most. Resist the temptation to measure everything. Track only 1 or 2 leading indicators such as minutes practiced or reps completed, and 1 lag indicator such as performance on a weekly challenge. Keep a compact log. Writing a single line each day about what you did and what changed creates a feedback archive that turns scattered attempts into coherent progress. The power of tiny gains also depends on environment and friction design. Make the desired action the path of least resistance. Arrange your world so the default behavior nudges you toward the micro-habit. Put a notebook by the bedside, pre-park your running shoes at the door, or install a 5-minute focus app that locks distractions for a short interval. Use commitment devices sparingly but strategically. Small financial stakes or public micro-commitments to a tiny action increase initiation without turning the habit into a stressful obligation. Finally, adopt a patience posture. Compounding rewards rarely feel dramatic day to day. Your role is to remain the consistent steward who trusts time and applies marginal improvement with humility. Celebrate tiny wins because they reinforce continuity, not because the win itself is large. Over months, the aggregated tiny advantages reshape ability, opportunity, and confidence and produce outcomes that dramatic efforts usually cannot sustain. Chapter 2. Designing micro-habits that stick. Designing a micro-habit that lasts is a design challenge more than a willpower test. The blueprint begins with clarity. Choose the one narrowly defined behavior that will produce the largest practical signal for your goal and compress it into the smallest repeatable unit possible. The unit must be measurable and non-ambiguous. Write 150 words, do 5 push-ups, read 1 page. Ambiguity kills consistency because it gives your mind room to negotiate. Next, hook the micro-habit to a reliable cue that already exists in your day. The cue could be a mealtime, a calendar alarm, or a daily ritual such as making coffee. Attaching new behaviors to existing anchors leverages established neural pathways and reduces startup friction. The habit loop is cue, behavior, and immediate feedback. Provide immediate feedback even when the ultimate result is long-term. The feedback can be as simple as checking a box in a habit tracker, recording 1 line in a journal, or a tiny celebratory gesture that signals completion. The third design principle is scaling by tiny increments. Instead of promising an unsustainable leap, define micro-progress steps that add up. After 21 days of a stable micro-habit increase, your commitment by a predetermined small step and treat the increase as another experiment, not a permanent escalation. The fourth principle is friction removal. Make the undesired alternative more difficult and the desired action easier. If distraction is the enemy, remove the common triggers. Install website blockers during prime focus times. Put your phone on airplane mode for a brief window, or move the refrigerator away from your desk if food is a saboteur. Leverage environmental nudges to lock in behavior with minimal deliberation. The fifth principle is social and accountability design. Commit to an accountability partner who checks in weekly about a single metric. Public micro-commitments, such as a short social post, increase psychological cost of slippage without requiring grand gestures. Use small public artifacts as proof of work. Post a tiny note, share a 1-sentence insight, or upload a short clip. Accountability should be light touch and supportive, designed to nudge rather than to shame. The final principle is forgiveness and restart mechanics. The world will interrupt your streak. Design a graceful restart rule, such as allow 1 missed day per month without penalty or require restarting only after 2 consecutive misses. The goal is to preserve momentum by avoiding catastrophic thinking that turns a minor lapse into abandonment. Micro-habits built with clarity, cue attachment, immediate feedback, friction management, social accountability, and compassionate restart rules are not merely sustainable. They scale reliably because they convert intention into repeatable action. Chapter 3. Tracking progress without obsession. A tiny habit requires measurement, but measurement should never reduce you to a prisoner of numbers. The practical approach to tracking is minimalist and signal-focused. Choose 3 types of metrics. A fidelity metric that records whether you completed the micro-habit, a performance metric that captures improvement quality, and a context metric that explains variance such as sleep hours or stress level. Record fidelity as a binary check. This creates consistency signals without the cognitive overload of complex scoring. Track performance with 1 simple proxy that correlates tightly with the desired outcome. For example, words per minute for writers, time to technical completion for coders, or controlled heart rate recovery for athletes. Context metrics provide explanatory power when performance dips and allow you to adapt quickly rather than panic or rationalize. The second rule is to measure at the cadence that informs action. Daily fidelity checks matter for habit formation. Weekly performance reviews are appropriate for minor adjustments. Monthly interpretation cycles let you spot trends and make more substantial pivots. Avoid the temptation to over-frequency. Endless daily complex analytics breeds paralysis. The third rule is to use lightweight tools. A single paper habit tracker, a simple spreadsheet with 3 columns, or a minimal habit app is enough. The tool should minimize friction in recording and make retrospective analysis effortless. The fourth rule is to create a short ritual for the tracking act itself. 2 minutes at the end of each day to mark fidelity, log 1 performance note and record a context signal. Ritualizing tracking reduces forgetfulness and keeps the data clean. The fifth rule is to interpret with curiosity, not judgment. When a metric falls, ask what changed in the environment rather than labeling yourself a failure. Build a hypothesis and run a micro-experiment to test it for a week. Data informs iteration, not shame. The sixth rule is to automate feedback loops where possible. Set simple alerts for critical thresholds and use automated summaries to show weekly progress so you can focus on adjustments, not data collection. The final rule is to celebrate meaningful inflection points. Track streaks, small milestones, and qualitative evidence such as a client compliment or improved mood. These signals are the emotional fuel that sustains long campaigns. Good tracking lets you adapt quickly, preserve momentum, and make compounding inevitable without turning the process into an anxiety generator. Chapter 4. Compounding through systems and environment. Compounding is an environment game as much as it is a behavior game. Systems turn repeated micro-habits into sustained progress by making the right choices automatic and the wrong choices costly. Start by designing a weekly system that sequences your micro-habits into coherent blocks of behavior, aligned with natural energy cycles. Protect prime hours for the highest leverage micro-habits and reserve low-energy slots for maintenance activities. Build a simple weekly review ritual to examine fidelity data, adjust targets, and schedule the next week's micro-experiments. The environment design extends to physical cues and social architecture. Place physical items that prime behavior where you will see them at the right moment: a book on the pillow to cue reading, a resistance band on the coffee table to cue movement, or an instrument on a stand to cue practice. Socially curate contact rhythms that reinforce rather than erode micro-habit work. Join a short weekly cohort that practices together, or a small accountability circle that trades a single outcome each week. Use commitment devices that convert intention into small stakes, such as micro-payments to a friend for missed days, or public pledges that you update weekly. Systems must include failure handling rules and resource buffers. Anticipate interruptions and predefine minimal acceptable behavior. When life gets busy, a 2-minute practice instead of the full routine ensures continuity and preserves identity. Resource buffers, such as a preloaded content queue or a reserve of prepared workouts, prevent missed days from becoming missed months. The fourth element is habit bundling. Combine complementary micro-habits into a single system to increase efficiency and to achieve multiplicative benefits. Pair a learning micro-habit with a social micro-habit, for instance. Read 1 page and then explain it in a short voice note to a peer. Teaching accelerates retention and increases accountability. Finally, view your systems as living infrastructure, not fixed rules. Iterate quarterly based on measured outcomes and keep the complexity minimal. Choose the fewest processes that produce the majority of results. When systems and environment align, 1% improvements no longer require heroic effort. They become the background mechanics of a life that consistently moves forward. Chapter 5. Overcoming plateaus and scaling 1%. Improvements. Plateaus are inevitable if you confuse mere repetition with deliberate progression. The 1% strategy requires periodic escalation and targeted problem solving. When progress stalls, first distinguish between a fidelity plateau and a performance plateau. Fidelity plateaus occur when the habit stops being consistent and require simplifying or re-anchoring the behavior. Performance plateaus occur when the behavior is stable, but the output stops improving and demands structured overload. Use a diagnostic sequence. Begin by examining context metrics. Did sleep, stress, or environment change? Next, inject creative variation change. One variable such as tempo, intensity, or modality to create a fresh stimulus. For a writer, switch from free writing to structured prompts. For an athlete, change rep tempo or introduce a novel movement. The third method is micro-periodization design, short concentrated cycles of increased load followed by recovery to force adaptation. For example, practice at 150% intensity for 1 week, followed by a lighter week, and measure net change. Periodization is powerful because it mirrors how bodies and skills adapt naturally and prevents chronic fatigue. The fourth lever is cross-training. Add complementary micro-habits that indirectly boost the primary skill, such as breath work for better focus, mobility for improved movement quality, or deliberate reflection to enhance decision speed. The fifth lever is feedback sharpening. Find a new source of higher quality feedback, such as a mentor, an objective metric, or a peer review, and use it to refine technique. Replace general praise with specific corrections that you can apply in the next microcycle. The sixth lever is goal recalibration. Sometimes plateaus signal a misaligned target. Shift to a new proximal goal that restores momentum and creates a fresh metric. The final strategy is scaling via compounding projects. Combine a set of micro-habits into a public artifact that forces integration and market feedback, such as a short course, a public series, or a small product. Market feedback accelerates learning by exposing your work to reality and often rewards integrated skill sets. Overcoming plateaus is a matter of diagnostic clarity, deliberate overload, varied stimulus, and better feedback. The combination keeps the 1% engine not only functioning but accelerating across months and years. Chapter 6. Habit stacking and routine architecture. The most reliable way to convert 1% improvements into steady progress is not to force yourself to invent heroic discipline each morning, but to architect routines that make good behavior automatic. Habit stacking is the method of chaining tiny, well-chosen actions to an existing habit, so that the new behavior piggybacks on a stable neural cue. Begin by mapping 3 reliable anchors in your day: the moment you wake, a mealtime, and the moment you go to bed. For each anchor, choose one micro-habit that nudges a target domain forward. The anchor must be nearly guaranteed to trigger. For example, if you always make coffee after waking, insert a 2-minute writing slot immediately after pouring the coffee. The micro-habit must be absurdly small, so skipping feels stranger than doing it. Design each stack as a short chain of 2 to 4 actions only: the cue, the micro-habit, a tiny reward, and a simple recording action. The reward need not be elaborate. Checking a box or noting 1 word of progress in a habit log is enough to reinforce repetition. Once chains are reliable for 2 to 4 weeks, extend by 1 small increment and treat that extension as a fresh micro-experiment rather than a permanent demand. The power of stacking comes from reducing initiation friction. When an action is predictable and short, it bypasses the deliberation loop that typically kills consistency. Environmentally prime each stack by placing physical cues where the anchor occurs. A notebook next to the coffee maker, a resistance band on the couch, or headphones on the bedside table. So the path of least resistance leads to the micro-habit. Another architectural consideration is time budgets. Group stacks into blocks that align with natural energy cycles. Prime blocks for skill. Heavy micro-habits such as focused learning or creative writing, and low-energy blocks for maintenance micro-habits such as quick mobility or email triage. Keep blocks short and deterministic. A typical prime block might be a 45-minute focus interval that contains a 10-minute micro-habit followed by 30 minutes of deeper work. That sequencing prevents premature exhaustion and creates repeatable success experiences. Use redundancy to protect against context drift. When travel or schedule changes break your usual anchor, have a portable micro-habit variant that fits the altered environment. For instance, a 2-minute breathing and visualization script works in airports and hotel rooms when full stacks are impossible. Accountability multiplies stacking effectiveness. Pair micro-habit stacks with a light social signal, a weekly 2-line update to a peer, a private accountability chat, or a public 1-sentence post. The social signal raises the cost of skipping without creating toxic pressure. Finally, systematize review rituals. Every week, perform a succinct 10-minute audit. Did the stacks fire? Which ones produced measurable forward movement, and which were merely busy rituals? Kill or refine the latter and keep the former. Habit stacking and routine architecture are not about heroic willpower. They are about designing predictable pathways so 1% improvements accumulate with low friction and high resilience. Start with one anchor, one micro-habit, one small reward, and a 1-line log. Repeat daily. After 12 weeks, the invisible stacks will have shifted how your day unfolds, and the compound effect will be unmistakable. Chapter 7. Social leverage and accountability networks. Tiny habits compound faster when you link them to other people because social systems amplify consistency and catalyze opportunity. Social leverage is about intentionally building a compact network structure that supports micro-habit growth and creates feedback loops that accelerate improvement. Start by defining 2 types of social nodes: accountability peers and skill amplifiers. Accountability peers are equals who check a single metric and expect a weekly update. Skill amplifiers are people with compliments and critique. They provide higher quality feedback and occasional stretch assignments. Structure your network with small, predictable rituals rather than open-ended relationships. For example, form a weekly 5-minute check-in with one accountability peer where you both state the micro-habit completed and one tiny result. The brevity preserves momentum and reduces friction to participation. Create a monthly learning microgroup for skill amplifiers, a short case review, or a micro-critique session where each member brings a specific artifact for focused feedback. The constrained format protects time while producing concentrated insight. Use public micro-commitments strategically. A short specific post, such as published 3 mornings in a row of 150 words each, is a public accountability device that raises initiation cost modestly and invites supportive engagement. Reciprocity is the grease of social leverage. Regularly give something small and useful, a curated resource list, a warm introduction or a brief critique, so you are not always the taker. Avoid over-networking. A compact, high-quality portfolio of relationships far outperforms a large, shallow network. Design repair rituals for social friction. When a peer cannot maintain commitments, move them to a lower cadence rather than cancel the relationship and lose the social asset. For higher leverage, align social nodes with your market. Seek peers who either are in the audience you want or who can introduce you to it. Strategic introductions should be short and purposeful. Propose a single collaboration experiment and limit the pilot to a small testable window. Finally, measure network outcomes. Track 2 social KPIs, number of accountability check-ins completed, and number of direct actionable feedback points implemented. These KPIs convert social activity into a predictable input for growth. Social leverage makes 1% improvements visible and contagious. When others hold a mirror or push back, you learn faster, and the compounding accelerates because social momentum compounds as reliably as individual habit. Chapter 8. Feedback loops and rapid iteration. The 1% model succeeds when your learning loop is tight and ruthless. Feedback is the accelerant that converts micro-behavior into measurable improvement. Without high-quality feedback, small habits drift into comfortable mediocrity. Build minimal but reliable feedback loops for each micro-habit. A loop contains a short action, an immediate signal, a reflective mini-review, and a small corrective move. For instance, if your micro-habit is a daily short writing practice. The immediate signal is word count and rough coherence. The mini-review is a 2-minute readback noting one sentence to improve, and the corrective move is a 10-minute focused edit. The loop must be fast, overnight, or within 24 hours, so the association between action and result remains tight. Use multiple feedback channels, objective measures such as time or reps, peer critique, and market signals like click-through or engagement when applicable. Calibrate the weight you give each channel. Market feedback should eventually outrank internal vanity metrics because external value scales better. When scaling complexity, add staged experiments rather than one big unrecoverable bet. Sequence experiments to increase intensity gradually and set explicit criteria for success or kill. A good rule is a 14-day initial pilot with 2 measurable success thresholds: fidelity and response. If both reach the predetermined levels, scale. If not, iterate with a controlled variable change. Document iterations concisely in a living experiment log: date, hypothesis, action, result, and next step. This log prevents repeated mistakes and creates institutional memory for your learning process. Use small statistical thinking. Do not overinterpret single-day anomalies, but watch rolling averages for real trends. Behavioral nudges such as micro-rewards and public artifacts also function as feedback. They tell you whether others find your work useful. Finally, guard feedback grace. Actively seek blunt but constructive input and create a culture of quick repairs for yourself. Feedback loops make 1% gains visible, testable, and repeatable. Tighten the loop and your compounding speed rises. Chapter 9. Building resilience through micro-recovery. Progress demands rest. Micro-recovery is the companion habit that prevents tiny improvements from burning out into regression. The idea is simple. Recover frequently and intentionally so the system sustains incremental overload. Begin by embedding short recovery rituals into your stacks and blocks. A 2-minute breath reset between prime focus intervals, a 10-minute mobility routine after a creative sprint, and a screen-free 20-minute break in the late afternoon. These are not indulgences but critical maintenance tasks that preserve cognitive bandwidth and physical readiness. Measure recovery effectiveness with simple subjective metrics: energy level, perceived clarity, and readiness to begin the next session, and record them in the same habit log used for micro-habits. When a sequence of micro-sessions shows deteriorating energy scores, prioritize a scheduled active recovery day, rather than doubling down on willpower. Micro-recovery also includes micro-rituals for emotional reset. A brief, expressive note about a single gratitude, or a 2-minute perspective switch, where you list 3 facts that are true irrespective of current setbacks. These small reframes stabilize mood and improve decision quality. Also design environmental recovery buffers, lighting that supports circadian rhythm, a standing desk to alternate posture, and an evening wind-down routine that excludes stimulants and bright screens. Social recovery matters too. Schedule light social contact that replenishes rather than drains, short walks with a friend, a 5-minute check-in call, or an audio message exchange. Finally, program periodic macro recovery windows, a 48-hour offline weekend, a short creative retreat, or a technology fast every quarter. These larger breaks reset baseline performance and prevent invisible accumulation of stress. Micro-recovery sustains the capacity to apply 1% improvements daily. Treat recovery as an active investment in your long-term compounding ability rather than a discretionary luxury. Chapter 10. Scaling 1%. From micro-habits to macro-change. Micro-habits accumulate not by accident but through deliberate scale rules that convert daily, small wins into transformative outcomes. Scaling begins with portfolio thinking. Diversify micro-habits across domains that reinforce each other: skill, health, social capital, and monetization. Each domain should include at least 1 micro-habit, 1 micro-experiment, and 1 measurable outcome. Together, these parallel tracks compound more powerfully than a single concentrated effort. Next, apply leverage rules. Automate what can be automated, delegate what can be delegated, and systematize what can be codified. For instance, convert a successful micro-habit into a template or a short course so others can adopt it, and you capture leverage. Use compounding projects as scaling multipliers. Small public artifacts that integrate several micro-habits into a single market-facing product, such as a short course, a serial essay, or a mini-service. These projects crystallize cumulative learning into visible value and accelerate feedback. Financially commit to disciplined reinvestment of small returns into capability. Allocate a fixed percentage of incremental income to skill and distribution rather than consumption. Track portfolio level, KPIs, not just fidelity. Measure net improvement in market outcomes, energy sustainability, and relational quality. Periodically prune low-yield micro-habits and double down on those that produce outsized returns. Institutionalize the 1% culture by teaching it. Mentor a peer, run a micro-cohort, or document a short playbook. Teaching forces synthesis and creates distribution that scales impact beyond your individual capacity. Finally, accept that scaling is not linear and build optionality. Maintain reserves of time and capital to seize multipliers when they appear. The combination of diversified micro-habits, disciplined reinvestment, leverage, and public projects turns daily 1% gains into macro transformation over months and years. Commit to the patient architecture of marginal improvement, and the cumulative result will be profound. Conclusion: the quiet architecture of radical progress. The promise of improving 1% each day is not a pep talk. It is a practical operating system for life. Choose one micro-habit to start right now. Stack it onto an existing anchor and commit to a simple tracking ritual. Build a micro-social node for accountability. Tighten a feedback loop and preserve recovery rituals so your system endures stress. Iterate with small experiments and treat failures as data, not identity. Over months, the patient application of tiny, well-designed routines creates optionality, competence, and confidence. Radical progress is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and stubborn. Start with a tiny action today. Keep it simple. Repeat tomorrow. The compound will do the rest.